think you're going to enjoy the Colonel's speech. I think he's just going to talk about what happened to him, you know, and he's got about an hour time, and I think we're going to enjoy every minute of it. So if you could please welcome Dan Doughty up here. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I thought about calling in sick this morning, but I didn't think Leroy would buy that 2 years in a row. And then when I started to get up here, I look and I see Dennis has got the cameras rolling. I feel like I'm going to interrogation now. I have to remember exactly what I said last time he did that. My story starts in Vietnam, 1964. I was a young Air Force captain, Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina, and I received orders to Japan. I was married, we had 4 kids, our youngest was just about 6 months old. And so we packed up and we moved to Misawa, Japan. The unit that I was assigned to there had been flying over Southeast Asia. From 1960, they started out of Bangkok and then they moved to Saigon about a year and a half before I got over there. I got my first missions out of Saigon in early 1965. Shortly after that, then the Rolling Thunder operation started, and we started going into North Vietnam. Flew out of Saigon and alternated out of Doughty, Thailand. And we fly over South Vietnam, Laos, and North Vietnam. It was in April of 1966. I had been there off and on for over a year, and was on my 170th combat mission, going into the lower part of North Vietnam, not too far above the DMZ. It was what we considered a milk run. The fellow I was flying with had not been down there for a while. We always went in not always, we went a lot of times with 2 aircraft. One was the primary navigator and the other was the backup photo. I was flying the RF-101. The RF-101, for those not familiar, was a single-seat, twin-engine fighter, but ours did not have any guns on it. The R designated reconnaissance, and we were strictly photographers. We had a motto of kill them with film. The airplane had 7 cameras on it, and we could take very good pictures at 200 feet going nearly 700 miles an hour, or up to real high altitude and get good pictures. We had a couple of nice high altitude cameras. Like any other Kodak camera, we had to see what we're taking a picture of. We didn't have any radar. And if the weather was bad, we would go low altitude. This particular day, the weather was bad. I was flying on the wing of Curly Walker, and we had 13 targets we were going to cover that day. We hit all of them except the last one, and was on the turn into that target. I was thinking about getting back to Saigon. It was Saturday afternoon. We had a big villa that we lived in Saigon, and every Saturday afternoon we had a steak cookout. The pilot that had the day off would go to the commissary and pick up a bunch of nice thick New York strips, pick up a case of Rosé Matus, and we had a nice cookout. I was getting low on fuel, and I was thinking about where was the best place to stop and get fuel, either Da Nang. I didn't like to go to Da Nang. It was always a depressing place to me, but it would have been the quickest, and the other option was go into Thailand. And that thought was short-lived because suddenly there was a sickening thump. And I knew I'd been hit. I tried to make a radio call. My radio was dead. And I was able to go from a left turn. I was going to start a right turn and head for Thailand, which is the closest friendly territory. But I'd only managed to turn about 20 degrees, and there was a deafening explosion. The aircraft had pitched straight up. I was going close to 700 miles an hour, but running low altitude. We'd stay below 500 feet above the ground, and I'd come across a ridge of hills, cleared the ridge by 100 or 200 feet. I had to be the luckiest guy in the whole world landing a 57mm gun there, because I had no more than passed the ridge of hills, and I think he hit me with the first round. It'd be kind of like hunting ducks with the 22. Pretty lucky shot. But anyway, it was a deadly shot. And I said, when you're going nearly 700 miles an hour this way, and then suddenly in a split second, you're going straight up, well, your body's still trying to go this way. And the airplane was breaking up, the cockpit was full of fire, and my head had been pushed right down into my lap. And through the fire, I could see the ejection seat handle, and it said, to eject, raise this handle. I thought, man, is that a good idea? I quickly tried to right myself in the cockpit. It was getting mighty hot in there. And when you pulled the ejection seat handles up, that blew the canopy off the airplane, and then squeezed the trigger, and there was a big cannon charge underneath the seat that sent you flying. The system was off pretty well, although rudimentary, automated. When the seat fired and went up the rails, once it cleared the rails, there was another initiator that fired and exploded and blew your lap belt open. Once the lap belt was open, it fired another charge that we called the butt kicker, that actually threw you out of the seat. But then you wanted to get separated from that seat so you didn't get tangled up in the parachute. Once that happened, then, depending on your altitude, the parachute would open either immediately if you were down low and slow, or after a couple of seconds if you're at higher altitudes. If you're way up high, it didn't open until you got down to 14,000 feet. In training, we'd always been taught to do everything manually. You squeeze the trigger, you go out, reach down and open your lap belt. When you're out of the lap belt, you push the seat away, reach over and pull your parachute. As I was reaching down to undo my lap belt, my parachute canopy was already opening. I had gained a lot of altitude, fortunately, and the airplane was almost at a stop when I came out of it. It rolled over, and I was hanging in the parachute, and the airplane was right beside me, fire roaring out of it, and it kind of did a circle around me and hit the ground. My plan was to try to get back to that ridge of hills I'd just come across. We had the standard round military parachutes, but you could make them somewhat steerable by cutting some of the shroud lines. And those lines were marked with red tape, and we carried a special knife for that occasion. So I reached up and I got my lines cut. I got a hold of the risers, and I was starting to steer the parachute towards that ridge. Well, about the time I got turned, where I was headed towards it, a kazing distraction there. And then I realized that there's a bunch of people on the ground that are shooting at me. And that's the first time I realized when you look down a rifle barrel in broad daylight, you can see the fire come out the end of the barrel. They ended up putting a few holes in my parachute canopy, but mainly they distracted me from trying to steer my parachute, you know. I kept pulling down the riser to turn this way and sing, and finally I decided there was no way I was going to make the ridge of hills anyway. I was going to get set for our landing, and where I could try to get to the jungle as fast as I could. I undid my parachute and just hung back in the harness. Never having done a parachute landing before, I had practiced some jumping off the back of a truck, but never a real parachute landing. I thought I did a beautiful job. I hit the ground, rolled over back up onto my feet, and I took off running. I forgot one little detail though. I still had on my oxygen mask, which had a rubber hose that was attached to the parachute harness that I just thrown off. Well, I ran that little 18-inch rubber hose stretched about 10 feet, I think, and then whopped flat on my back, right behind a big boulder about the size of that table. And that was probably a lifesaver because they were coming with their guns blazing. I had a Smith & Wesson Combat Masterpiece 6-shooter, but I didn't feel I was as good at John Wayne was at picking off 100 people coming at me with rifles. And within about a minute, they were there and captured me. I was paraded around that night to several locations. One of them, I assume, was the gun site that got the credit for shooting me down. Spent the night then in a little village, and then was taken up into the mountains the next day and put in a cave where I spent a few days. Eventually, out of the cave and started to move, and instead of going north, we were going southeast. They started out in a truck, but it only went about 10 miles. They ran the truck in the ditch and rolled it on its side. And then I walked the rest of the way. I think 3 days or 3 nights. We never walked during the day. And ended up down by the village of Doughty. Up to that time, I'd been kept with the local militia, and I got along pretty well. There was one time there where the guy that said he was a Russian reporter tried to ask me some questions and swap me around a little bit. Otherwise, the treatment was pretty good, and I did get some pretty good food. There was only a couple of mock executions that took place in there. Shortly after I was captured, they had me kneel down on a dike between a couple of rice paddies, and they were behind me, had me kneeling down. I thought it was going to pop me off here and roll me in the paddy, but then next time they had me up heading back into a village, and of course I was blindfolded. Guy on each side of me, and they stopped, and I knew something was going on because they went on each side of me, and there was a lot of yakking going back and forth. And all of a sudden, one of them reached up and pulled the blindfold off. And there were 3 guys lined up in firing squad fashion with their rifles. And they held them there for a few seconds, and then put them down and started laughing. They really had a good joke. From the time that I was shot down until I arrived in Hanoi was just about a month. I got shot down on the 2nd of April, 1966, and I arrived in Hanoi on the 1st of May. Along the way is where I spent a few days in the city of Vinh, where I went the first interrogations. And it was there that I spent just about a week. Probably one of the most miserable weeks, in fact, the most miserable week of my life. The treatment was absolutely horrible. About the 2nd day of interrogation, the interrogator said, "You might as well tell me what I want to know, because I can make the dead man talk." By the end of about the 3rd day, I started bleeding. It was absolutely brutal. And then on to Hanoi. And I thought I'd just cover it. I was in different camps there, and some of them different times. So I thought I'd go through just what life was like in the different camps. And now I can only speak to the camps in North Vietnam. The people in South Vietnam had it completely different than we did. We kind of were at a picnic compared to what they had in the South. Many of them that were captured in the South were eventually brought north and released out of Hanoi, but they spent most of their time in South Vietnam. But anyway, the first camp we got to in Hanoi was one of what they called the Hanoi Hilton Complex. It was a place we called Heartbreak Hotel. And there was 6 or 7 cells, probably 5 feet wide, 6 feet wide. They had concrete bunk on each side, and built into the was stocks that they could lock from outside the door. I didn't get interrogated very much once I arrived in Hanoi to start with, because I'd been a month, like I said, and they had more recent shoot downs, and they had 2 other RF-101 pilots that they'd gotten closer to Hanoi, so they've already had them for quite a while. So the interrogations were mostly looking for political propaganda, wanting to write statements that you'd gotten good treatment and that kind of stuff, and that you'd committed crimes against the people. But anyway, refusing to write anything, and they didn't bat me around too much. Then moved to a camp that we called the Zoo. The Zoo got its name from the first guys that were brought in there. They said here they had, the animals were running loose and the people were in the cages. The building there, the first one that I was put into, the cell was about 8 feet wide and about 10 feet deep. A really high ceiling, maybe 9 or 10 feet high ceiling. Right up next to the ceiling was a 4x8 vent. That was the only ventilation for the room. The door was a solid wooden door with a little trap door that they could open to peer in or to hand the food through sometimes. The only furnishings in the room was a pallet about the size of a table, built up off the floor with brick about 16 inches off the floor. Initially, I did not have a mosquito net. The only furnishings I had was a 10-quart tin bucket in the corner for toilet and a straw mat to put on the bed. The routine at the zoo was started in the morning. They always turned on what we called the camp radio. There was a loudspeaker in each cell. And they turn on the loudspeaker every morning, let us listen to Hanoi Hannah. And then about 10, 11 o'clock, they would come around with our first meal. In between there was probably the time where they would have come around and have you put your toilet bucket out and either go into it or have, usually they had just one guy empty them all from one cell block. But then about 11 o'clock, you got the first meal. And there, the first meal was a small loaf of bread and a bowl of soup. One of 3 varieties. We had pumpkin, cabbage, and sewer grass. The pumpkin was just small cubes of pumpkin floating in lukewarm water. Cabbage had a little cabbage leaves again in lukewarm water. The other stuff, not sure what it was, but it was green, slimy stuff floating in the water. That first meal, I said, was about 11 o'clock. Then about 6 o'clock in the evening, we got another session with Hanoi Hannah. And then the evening meal would come around with an identical meal. Had a little ceramic jug that we'd get filled with water once a day. I spent about a month, I guess. I was put off into a little building on the edge of the camp, isolated from the other buildings by about 30, 40 feet. And one day, from the other building, they called out. I knew there were Americans over there because I had a hole in my door that I could put my eye up and see out. And I'd been seeing people come into the bath area there. And one day they called out and said, "Hey, new guy out there, who are you?" And so I got my name to them, and they wanted to know. Of course, the first question for a new guy was always, "When's the war going to end?" I thought it was going to be 1 year. When I got there, I started my countdown, counting down, because I figured I got 365 to go, click that one off and on down. And about the third time around, going through the list, I thought, damn, I forgot it's leap year. I got an extra day to go this year. But they called out to me and wanted to know if I knew the tap code. And I said, no. They started explaining it to me. And then I flashed back several years earlier when I'd gone through a survival school. And the guy in the class said, Dan, when we get into the compound and they lock us up in little cubicles, here's a code that we can use to communicate. Well, I didn't pay attention to the guy because they were going to pretend they captured us out in the mountains after trekking through the mountains for a week. And we're only going to be in there for 1 day. I'm going to rest. I'm not going to spend my time trying to talk to you with a tap code when I can talk to you in person tomorrow. So I just ignored what he told me. But now, when they mentioned that, where that came back to me just like a light bulb went off. And I said, yeah, I know it. I was completely isolated from anybody else other than this once in a while conversation I get from them. But I laid out there on my tablet and I would practice that code. And the code was 25 letters. You had to drop the letter K from the alphabet. If you needed a K, you just substituted the letter C. And then you had 5 rows, 5 letters in each row, and used a series of taps to indicate which row and then which letter in the row. So if I were to give my name Dan, I'd go, and I've spelled out my name. And so I practiced that. I spent a month separated out there from anybody else until I moved into another cell that had somebody living next door to me. And I was able to send the code very well. That did I have one heck of a time trying to translate the code coming back to the wall the other way. These walls were thick masonry construction. And at first got there, I thought you really had to wrap that thing hard. And that was, they got to me quick and said, don't tap so loud, you know, they're going to hear you over in the head shed. And just use your knuckle and tap. But anyway, it took me quite a while to get where I could master the code and receive it. And once I did master it, I could sit there and talk just like I was talking to you here. I spent until June of that year at the place, the zoo, and then I moved to a camp we called the Briar Patch. The Briar Patch was about 40 miles west of Hanoi. It was a little different out there. The camp Hanoi had electric light and a little light bulb that burned 24 hours a day and a whitewashed cell, so it was bright in there all the time. The Briar Patch is no electricity, no whitewashing. The walls had been stuccoed with real rough stucco, so you made it trouble to tap on the wall. The routine out there was completely different. Now instead of receiving your morning meal at 11 o'clock, you got your morning meal before the sun came up. They come around before daylight, bring you your morning meal. When you finished eating, they tied your arms behind your back, and you spent the rest of the day arms tied behind the back. The evening meal came after sunset, and then they would take the rope off one arm. They always kept the rope tied to one arm. There we had interrogations quite frequently, and they were always for usually political type stuff. The first thing they started with was they had a campaign going. They were going to make everybody write an autobiography. And a lot of this stuff I'd already told them in the initial interrogations. but they wanted it written down. And I think we all there did everything we could before you could write an autobiography. Well, about a month after that, it was something else they wanted. And then that fall, they come around and they wanted a war crime confession from everybody. From people moving around, we know when this had started in the Hanoi area already. And they started in our camp on the east side. The worst part of the writing the war crime confession was hearing the people come to the interrogation room. The cell I was in was right next to the interrogation room. And you hear people come to there and spend days in there in absolute misery until they would agree to a right. There were 50 of us at that camp. Eventually everyone ended up writing a war crime confession. They had a all written out for you, but they wanted to say, told you don't lose any words. They didn't say about you can't add a few words. And I don't think they actually ever read most of them. But it was absolutely brutal time in that camp. And this took place in all the camps in North Vietnam. One of the guys that had recently been captured was in Hanoi, and he ended up writing a fairly lengthy war crime confession. He didn't follow the form they had written it, he just copied. He wrote his own, and they were really impressed. There was a fellow over in Stockholm, Sweden, was going to run a war crime tribunal, Bertrand Russell. And so Mills had written this lengthy confession, and that was the one they selected to take to Stockholm for the war crime trials over there. What they didn't realize was that Mills had, thank you, yeah, thank you very much. One thing that they didn't realize was that Mills had really stuck it to him. He had written about all the people on the aircraft carrier, all of his squadron mates, and he used all the comic strip characters and all the TV characters. The flight surgeon was Dr. Casey or somebody that was popular back then on the video. And all the comic strip characters were his fellow pilots. And the things that the aircraft carrier could do was just absurd, but they bought it for flying and sinker. I met a reporter that was present at this tribunal in Stockholm when it took place, and that was one of the first pieces of evidence that they entered into the tribunal. And he said when they read that, the entire press corps broke out in laughter, and it just embarrassed the daylights out of the Vietnamese officials, who I think came down hard on the military, who came down hard on the camp commander, who came down hard on Mills. He spent the next 18 months with his hands handcuffed behind his back and his legs in iron stocks. But he said it was worth it for getting to him. Every month it seemed at the Briar Patch there was something like that going on. The food was about the same, except instead of a loaf of bread, we got a bowl of rice. One of the first meals I had there, I'd sat down on my pallet to eat, and I reached down in pitch black to get my bowl of rice, and something ran across my hand. Finally realized that the place was full of these big water roaches, and if you set anything down, they just covered it immediately. So you had to put the rice in your lap and keep swishing them away to keep them from getting the food. The food was soup was about the same as what we'd have in Hanoi, maybe not as much vegetable in it. Everybody there suffered from vitamin deficiency, very. We had 4 of the guys that were there during the time I was there that ended up legally blind because of vitamin deficiency. The bed there, instead of being made out of a 1-inch thick board, was made out of 2-inch thick board. And believe me, there's a difference in comfort level sleeping on a 1-inch board versus a 2-inch. The 1-inch was firm, this was the extra firm. And after several months there, it was back to Hanoi, back to the zoo again. In May of 1967, I went to interrogation one day, and here they brought in another guy that has been shot down about 2 weeks before me. And they said, you know, today we give you a cellmate. He had been in solitary for the entire time, the same as me. And we moved in together. That night, we had this stuff to talk about. We talked until they come and told us we had to go to bed. The next day we talked and we talked and we talked. So their throat got the feeling like mine does right now. Now I got to do a little snort here. Yeah, water or bed. I was hoping somebody's taking a little baby in there. Anyway, we talked and we talked, and that went on for days. And finally, after a while, you end up about things to talk about. And we're living in this 8 by 10 or 12 foot room, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We get out for a bath maybe once a week, depending on your attitude. You know, we were always getting taken in for attitude correction. And sometimes you wouldn't go for 2 or 3 weeks. Back at the briar patch, sometimes we'd go a month to 6 weeks without getting out for the bath. But Art and I, we talked and we talked. And then, you know, after a year, we're still in that little cubicle. And I've heard every funny story he ever knew, probably a couple of times. And same with him and me, and we still give the courtesy of laughing at them. But then after 2 years, you know, it's kind of a lot hard to laugh at the same damn story. And we ended up in that cell for 2.5 years. And then when we moved to a 4-man cell, but he was still there with me for another year. By this time, the treatment, there was interrogations had boiled down. They were more just political harassment. You would go in and they would ask you the same questions over and over, and then go over why you're in such trouble, and if you had a good attitude, you would get better treatment. They never said they were punishing you or something. They're always helping you think correctly. But this went on and on. And then in 1968, they started really a good guy treatment program. Things started improving. They talked about a lot of people going home soon and wanting to know if we were going to have to say about them when we go home. And this went on for several weeks. And then the bombing stopped in North Vietnam. The next day, our treatment went right back downhill again. No more talk about going home soon. And we were right back where we started from. The next year, we had an escape. They called it the zoo annex. It was the zoo, and there was an area that they had opened up to keep prisoners in right next to it. And the escape had taken place there. 2 guys got over the wall one night, and they didn't get very far. They were recaptured, brought back, tortured brutally. One of them died, the other one ended up surviving. But then they started a purge of everyone in every building in the camp. They found out, because they went through the cell that the guys had escaped from, was a 6-man cell. So the other 4, they were the first to get worked over. And they You know, I've heard recent years that torture doesn't work. Well, if you're torturing just one person, no, you can give them all kinds of BS and they got nothing to back it up. But when you've got 4 different people and they keep you separated and they keep going at you until the stories all match, it does work. It took them some time. They finally got all the information from that. Then they went to each building. We had a communication network, not just tapping on the wall, but sending code and flash code. These little vents on up in our cell, some of the beds were loose. You could take those over and turn them over, and the plates on the back could climb up and see out those vents. Some of the cells that had 2 men in, one would stand on one's shoulders and get up. And in the building I was in was the first one established this. The guys up there, one day waving, pretty quick somebody clear across the camp coughed. He waved in code. The guy coughed back in code. And suddenly we had a communication link across camp. Well, then the camp annex was across the wall from us, but the building next to us had a view of one of the bathing areas over there. And they started that, and the same thing, they got connection. The guys on the other side, we used hand code. We had 2 different hand codes that we used. One was similar to the mute deaf code with 1 hand. The other was the long distance code, which you use 2 hands to form the letters. But anyway, we knew everybody that was in that side of the camp, and we had all the names. We would come across to the building that we called the garage, and then we had a note drop between the building that I was in and the garage, and they dropped a note there. I was the note guy for our building, and when you got out to Bath, I took up the note and bring it back. Writing notes was quite difficult. Our toilet paper was kind of like a very rough brown paper towel. Take a piece of that, get a chip of brick or a chip of coal, file it smooth on the floor, and make a writing utensil. It was really hard to get really small, but you could cram a lot of information into a small note, roll that up, pull the string out of my blanket, tie that note up as small as I could, and then I had to keep it on myself someplace where they wouldn't find it during our shakedown inspections that we had every week, because you didn't know when you were going to get to the bath area again. But anyway, pass that on. Well, during this purge, they found out about the link across the camp, across the note drop to our building, and it just went right down the line. All the senior officers were pulled out and just brutalized for weeks on end. They found out everything about our tapping, and I knew they knew before that about the tap code. They knew it, and they knew basically how it worked. On occasions, they would take somebody out of a cell, take them for interrogation for bath, and then one of the interrogators would stay in the cell and try to tap on the wall. And I swear, they tapped with an accent. You could pick it up the instant you knew it wasn't who was supposed to be tapping on the other side. And I had them twice try to entrap me that way, and it was just instant. You knew it wasn't legit. I said that the treatment was just brutal for several weeks there. This little vent up in our cell, they closed those all off. The summers in Hanoi were brutally hot, and without any ventilation at all, you just perspired 24 hours a day. My fingernails had all come loose and just dangled there. Had heat rash on the complete body, on heat rash on top of heat rash. And the only relief was to lay on the bare concrete floor. That would help absorb some heat. But if they come around saw you laying on the floor, you were punished for laying on the floor. So it was a tight, tough go there for quite a while. Following that, though, then they had a big move in the camp. That's then when I moved in with two other guys. Art and I moved into a 4-man cell. Not much bigger than the cell we just come from, but it had sleeping area for 4 people. But they started loosening up on our communication. They knew we communicated so well that it was just impossible for us to stop. And so they still tried to tell you not to do it, but there wasn't any great punishment for it. They started opening up some of the windows that had been bricked up. They had a window in North Vietnam was a hole in the wall, and the hole in the walls had bars in them, and then they bricked those all up so you had nothing. Well, they started taking some of the bricks out of the windows. And then September 1969, Ho Chi Minh died. A very solemn time for the camp officials and the guards. But then following that, within a couple of weeks, a major change in our treatment. They come along and they took out all the bricks out the windows. They started leaving the shutters open, letting fresh air, started to let us out every day for more exercise, and started, we still weren't able to mingle with them in the other cells. They let one cell at a time out, but it was just a major improvement. The food quality wasn't any better, but the quantity got better. We started getting more to eat, and that was just because of the regime change. Once Ho Chi Minh died, they knew that if there were going to be any value to them at all when it come time to end the war, that we better be in better shape than what we were in. When I was captured, I probably weighed 185 pounds. At one point, I got down for, I estimate, about 115 pounds, so I was pretty much skin and bones. Another camp that I was in then was out west of Hanoi, again, about 25 or 30 miles. And here was in with a bigger group. There were cells that had from 4 to 6 in, and then I was in the big cell that had 20 of us in. When I moved in there, I thought, God, why I'm with all the old guys? I thought I was in the senior officers, because here's all these dilapidated looking people, until I realized I just dilapidated as they were. And, but anyway, of course, when you moved in with somebody new, it was, what's your data rank? Senior man's in charge. And thank God, Bob Purcell was there, outranked me by 1 day. And so he was the senior officer in the group. Back when I first got my first cellmate, when Art moved in with me, that was his first question, what's your data rank? Well, I outranked him by about 2 years. And he says, okay, Dan, you're the commander and I'm the man. But anyway, here we got out every day. About 40 of us could get out and mingle around. We got out, we were able to get a bath every day if you needed one. And the food got considerably better as far as quantity of rice. We were getting plenty to eat. Again, it was mostly rice and soup, but the soup had a lot of consistency to it. We weren't there too long though, and one night, of course this is during the bombing halt, one night all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. There's rockets going off, there's bombs going, and there'd been a bombing halt. I was too sick to get off my pallet. I'm not sure what I had, but I was really sick. But the other guys were looking out the window, seeing shells going off in the air, missiles going off, and so on. And then the next day, a bunch of trucks showed up in the camp, and they loaded us up and hauled us back into Hanoi. And that's when we moved into the place they called the Hanoi Hilton. We were now in big cells. They were probably designed for 30, 35 Vietnamese prisoners, but they had 50 of us in there. They had about 17 inches of sleeping space. And here, instead of sleeping on boards, we slept on concrete. They had concrete slabs built up off the floor. The concrete was the ultra firm. Sealy would have had it. They would have been really out of luck there, because there was nothing better than solid concrete to sleep on. It was really actually a good move for us, because now we've got all the diverse backgrounds of people. And we started having classes. We had people that were fluent in Spanish and German, Russian, and so we had language classes. We had anything, you could think of anybody that thought they could teach something, did. And we also had poker night. We made poker chips, take the bread and peel the crust off and just use the dough, squish that up and get this gummy, and you could make stuff out of it. Make dice and poker chips, take and put cigarette butts or coal dust. You could make black chips, get some brick dust, and make red chips. White ones were just plain. But we found as soon as we got the first batch made, though, that we had to have some protection cover for them, because at night the rats come in and ate them all. Early on, there's been some packages come in. That's early on in the '68 time frame. And some people had gotten playing cards in their packages. Well, we had a big shakedown one day, and they came around and took away all the stuff that anybody had ever received in their package. But then they started issuing playing cards. They were thick cardboard, like a deck of cards was about that thick. And you didn't dare shuffle them like you used to shuffling, because they'd all break in half. But we had our poker night. We had movie night. Every night we had a movie. Someone who'd seen a good movie would sit at the head of the group, and one group would bring the blanket and sit around on the sleeping pallet there, and they would tell a movie. Some of these would last 2 and 3 nights, and some of them were really good. We had one guy that his parents, I think, had owned a theater, and he had seen hundreds and hundreds of movies and remembered them very well. And he was our main movie teller. But others, just any good movie that they'd seen. So I made it a point when I got home to go see some of those movies, because they were such darn good stories. And I found the story they told had no resemblance to the real movie at all. But they were good storytellers. After some time there, they started bombing again in earnest and very close to Hanoi. And they packed up 220 of us, and they took us north to a place we called Dog Patch. Dog Patch would have been a beautiful place to visit. It's up near the China border. These beautiful karst jungle-covered mountains there. Lots of birds around. There's a little stream come down the waterfalls not too far from the camp. You could hear the water, and the stream meandered right through our camp. Would have been a beautiful sight, except they built the buildings right over top of this little stream. Now, instead of having a tin bucket for a toilet facility, we had a hole in the floor. I felt sorry for the village that was right downstream from us, getting their water from that nice little brook that came out of the mountains. There was no electricity up there. We didn't have any loudspeakers in the cells. But the camp commander would come around on occasion and read newspaper articles. And when we heard that in October of 1972, that they were bombing with B-52s into North Vietnam, we all cheered, and he didn't think that was a good idea. But at that time, the treatment was not really bad. And then come along Christmas time, and it was quite obvious they were bombing the Hanoi area with B-52s. And he came around one time and read us an article, and then we didn't hear any more from him. But we knew just from the actions that was taking place in the camp that we weren't going to be there much longer. Whenever it would come time to move, they would come in and give us this roll-up signal. Take your hands and go like that. And we had the straw mat that we slept on. We all had a mosquito net and 1 or 2 blankets and an extra pair of pajamas. And this particular night, our officer that was in charge spot came in. He had his little kerosene lantern, gave us the roll up, and then he looked around, and everybody was rolled up and ready to go. He says, "Who tell you?" And all we had to do was look outside and see all the trucks come into camp, and we were heading out. Now, when we moved up there, we only traveled at night. On the way back now, we took off early in the morning and went all day. Much faster ride back to Hanoi that was going up. The roads weren't much better, but the bumps didn't seem to bother me as much as we were heading out. We got back to Hanoi, back into the Hanoi Hilton, back into one of the same cell blocks I'd been before I left there. And now we're arranged in quarter to our shoot-down dates. Those captured first would be going home first. And I think it was on the January, camp commander, first time that he had recognized our military organization, our military leaders. There were 4 colonels that were captured, that they had them off separate, but we had the lieutenant colonel and several maybe commanders in the group. But anyway, the first time they recognized the military organization, and they had Colonel Reisner call us all out for formation. There were 350 of us in that camp at the time. We fell out into a big courtyard in military formation. When we'd been in the Hilton before, this courtyard was all divvied up into bamboo cubicles so you couldn't see from one to the other. Now it's all opened up. There's a couple of volleyball nets set up. There's a couple of basketball hoops. Nothing that we ever got to use. It was strictly there for the photographers that were going to be covering the release. And the camp commander then got up on a stool and said he had some important information for us. But he said, "Before I do, when you get home, I want you to remember that I'm a good guy. And I'm required to read this document to you within 5 days, and I do it in only 3. So what a nice guy." Anyway, he read us the protocol on the release of prisoners. And we knew then that within 2 weeks, the first of us would be going home. Going to be released according to your capture date, other than some sick and wounded. February 12th, 73 came around. We formed up and we left the Hilton. 120 of us that day going out. We'd been on the bus for quite a while. These people along the street were cheering and waving as we left. And we stopped a couple miles short of the airport, and we sat there for at least an hour in the bus. These buses were like big vans that held 20 people in each bus. Finally, they offloaded us all, took us into a building, just barely big enough to hold 120. And there they brought us a piece of toasted bread that had been dipped in sugar and half a cup of beer. And they said, "Well, there's a problem with negotiations." So we sat there for about an hour. We all expected we were going to be back on the bus, headed back to camp. We're back on the bus and out to Guam Airport. And there sat this big, beautiful Air Force C-141. I'd never seen one before. I knew the darn thing held over 200 people. There's only 120 of us going out. So the first 2 buses, 40 people offload, go onto that airplane. It closed its doors, started the engines, and away it went. And you talk about a sinking feeling. No one on the bus that I was on said a word, but years later, in talking to them, they all had the same thought that I did, was something went wrong, they bugged out, we're going back to camp for tonight. But unbeknown to us, they were only putting 40 on an airplane. They had 3 different airplanes come in. And the group that I was in was towards the end, and so we got on the 3rd airplane out the first day, flew into Clark Air Base in the Philippines. Tremendous welcome there. I think every American station at Clark Air Base turned out. And we went to the hospital there at Clark for initial evaluations. Our first meal there, they said they're going to have something for us to eat, and the first people that went down to the dining room, here they had some damn POW or something. And they said, you know, we want something to eat, we don't want that stuff. And they were worried about our digestive system, and we said, forget about our digestive system, give us some real food. And, so they said, okay, go back to your rooms, we'll get the rest of the kitchen crew in here, and we'll do it right. And they did. When we went back down, and you got through the line, you could get whatever you wanted. I had steak and eggs. The guy in front of me had a dozen eggs. And then a big bowl of ice cream afterwards. That evening then, back in my cell, in my room, nice bed with nice white sheets, a bathroom with a stool in it, was nice white shiny, not a rusty old tin bucket. This is really heaven. And the nurse come in about midnight, and I was still wide awake, and she said, well, she'd bring me a sleeping pill. I should get some rest, you know. Well, she brought me a sleeping pill, and come back about 2 o'clock, and I was still wide awake, and she gave me another sleeping pill. Finally, she came in and says, you know, why don't you just go down to the kitchen, you know, it's open, you can go down there and help yourself. Well, you want? I went down and made myself a ham sandwich. Forget the bread, I had 2 slices of ham, I want that thick, I want that big, and a big slice of cheese. I spent 3 days there at Clark, and then boarded a C-141. Got my first flight to Hawaii. We landed in Hawaii at 4 o'clock in the morning for a 1-hour refueling stop. And then back to St. Louis, Illinois, Scott Air Force Base. And that's where I got off the airplane and met my wife. The kids and my parents came down the next day. It was the first time I'd seen them. The boy, you know, he was less than 2 years old, and now, damn, he was tall as I was. And they all had long hair. But anyway, I met them, and I spent almost 2 weeks in the hospital there at St. Louis. I spent a lot of time in the dentist chair getting the teeth that had been chipped. I think the rice farmers over there got paid by weight, and when they did their rice, they swept up a lot of little pebbles in it because there were lots of little stones in the rice. Really hard on the teeth. Plus, not having a toothbrush most of the time for 7 years was a kind of a not good for the dentist. They didn't like that, not brushing that often. But anyway, then it was back up to Ladysmith. 1st of March of 1973, I returned to my hometown, Ladysmith. And I think the whole town turned out. They let school out. The kids were all there, and we parked right in the middle of Main Street. And I got to meet a lot of my extended family there, and just one heck of a good time. So unlike a lot of people that come by that weren't welcome back, I had a tremendous welcome when I come home. So that kind of summarizes my time in Vietnam. Thank you very much for listening, and hope I haven't bored you too much. Thank you.